Now we're going to talk about step 3. So step 3 is designing the assessment. So you're choosing 2 objectives, and you're going to describe the formative assessments that you're going to use for those objectives. And then 2 objectives, and then the summative assessment. So here's just a reminder that formative is ongoing. I give some examples of what formative assessments are, and then summative assessments are the end of unit assessment. So an example would be like a performance task, a test, a project, a portfolio, something like that. So you want to make sure you explain, right, how is it measurable? So I give some examples here as well remember that assessment is intentional documentation. So thinking about how are you going to be able to share this with families, right? So if I go back to my example with plants, right, what am I going to do to show the families that their child learned these things, that their child achieved these objectives? So I need to have documented evidence of that. So these are just some examples of exit tickets. I also have some examples of anecdotal note takers that I could possibly use. Here's some more examples of some checklists that I could possibly use, some more anecdotal note catchers. I also have links in here of just Google searches for anecdotal note catchers. So just thinking about checklists, potential checklists that I could use. So just think about how are you going to, in a conference, right? How are you going to show the families that the students achieved the objectives, or, that they need support with specific objectives? So what I would say, for example, here where it says 2 objectives and then 2 formative assessments. So maybe for this first objective, I didn't finish that one, but for this one, that's a SMART objective here, right? I'm going to put, here's my SMART objective, right? They're going to ask and answer 3 questions about plants using an anchor chart. So then maybe my formative assessment is going to be, I'm going to have them turn and talk with a partner, and while they are talking, I am going to use a checklist to record if students are able to ask and answer questions about the non-fiction book about plants. And then here at the end, there's an appendix section where I can include a visual of what my checklist might look like. So maybe my checklist is going to look something like this. This is the kind of checklist I always like to use, where you have student name, and then I'll put here formative checklist. I have the student name, formative checklist for objective 1. A student name, and then asks, questions, answers, questions, and then here I have another column on the right that says notes. So maybe my student's name is Javier, and I check and I say, yes, Javier can ask questions. Yes, Javier can answer questions. And then I put here, Javier uses the sentence frames provided to help him. And then here I put another student, Sarah. Sarah is able to answer questions, but she's not able to ask questions. So here I'm going to write needs more support with this area. So this is an example of a checklist that I might use, and I can put it here in the appendix as my example of what my assessment would look like. You could also put it in this section if you want. And then here, so students will be able to observe and predict patterns of what plants need to survive. So again, this one is not smart. So I'm going to put here, this is not smart. So I cannot make an assessment for this because it is not a SMART goal. So I need to go back, make this a SMART goal before I can do my formative assessment. Now, my summative assessment, right, would be like an end of unit activity, right? So then maybe for this summative assessment, if I'm doing plants, let's say, if my theme is plants, so maybe my end of unit assessment would be students will create their own nonfiction book about plants. They will create their own question and answer nonfiction book about plants, with nonfiction books about plants based on their observations of and the nonfiction books read as a class. So now I'm saying they're going to create their own question and answer book about plants. I could even include a technology portion to it. I can say students will use the free book creator website to create their book. So this would be my example. Or maybe I have a template that I saw on Teachers Pay Teachers, and I can include that if I want here in the appendix. So if I found on Teachers Pay Teachers a template for a question and answer book about plants, I can include a link to that here in my appendix from Teachers Pay Teachers, or I could even just link it here. Or here I can link the book creator website. So really just trying to give as much information as I can with, what are these assessments going to look like? Because when you're writing a plan, you want to write it as so that somebody can copy it. I should be able to take this plan and then go and teach it tomorrow. So think about that when you're doing this.